start. We are already a few minutes behind time. Welcome to this concluding session of a very absorbing conference that Professor Imtiaz Hussain and his team have put together, addressing the multi-dimensional aspects of this conundrum that we are all facing, not just Bangladesh, but entire the region and the world is facing today. And in this session, we have a packed panel of very eminent discussants. We have two foreign secretaries in this. One, the foreign secretary who had to face the issue when the crisis occurred, and the person who is now having to try and see if some solution if there's some light at the end of the person. And the present foreign secretary actually standing by, he will give us some idea of what's happening, what's likely to happen, or how the government sees it panning out. We have several special guests. Notably, sitting on my left is Mia Seppo. She's the head of the UN systems in Bangladesh. And also joining us online will be Dr. Mercy Tembon, the country director of the World Bank. So we'll get the international organization's perspective on what's been done so far and how they see the future evolving and what needs to be done. We have people from civil society, and we have a former expert on refugees, Dr. Shamsal Bari, an old friend of mine, my senior in the university, and we worked closely when we were both in India in the mid-90s, and he was having to face the brunt of the Afghan refugee problems, which had just burst into the surface around then, the mid-80s. With these few words, each participant will have about 10 minutes, but I will be a little flexible as if required. I would commence with a few introductory remarks of my own perception of the current imbroglio. We have dealt with the subject, I think, quite exhaustively. The first session basically dealing with what existed up there in the hills in the Chittagong Hill tracts from this, then how it developed, the pre-camp blues, then what were happening inside the camp, and now are we looking at a post-camp scenario? What are we likely to face? Basically, this is crystal gazing. That's the best way I can describe it as, because this crisis is far from over. I think to set the backdrop, a few general remarks, few questions all of us need to have in our mind, whether we are Bangladeshis or we are from the international community or we are from other nations watching this scenario, whether they are near or far. Who are the Rohingyas? Do they have a sense of being a nation? Essentially, it boils down to their view of themselves, where they belong, and what has triggered them. They could have stayed on and tried and borne it out and fight it there, but what triggered their response and the outflow, why it happened. You know, I think the Vice Chancellor in his opening remarks, the first few sentences he spoke this morning, said something profound. And he paraphrased what George Santayana, the philosopher, said: if we forget history, we are condemned to become prisoners of history. And unfortunately, history, whether you go back a few centuries or a few millennia, has a tendency to be repetitive. It comes in cycles. Problems which are similar with different dimensions, but very similar in nature, come again and again because men forget their history. And this is something we have to remember. This is not something that is happening at the first time or only in this region. The the Myanmar Rohingya influx has been happening for quite a long time, more or less soon after our countries gained independence, but it has happened in other regions of the world. What are the implications of those? What have we learned from those? Are there any lessons? Are there similarities or are there variances? That's what we need to do. That's what policymakers have to focus on. Usually, policymakers don't have time to look in depth in these things. Number two, what do we mean by nationness? What constitutes nationhood? Do they have, you have two narratives in conflict with each other. You have, on the one hand, those who control the territory of the state which they think they belong to and is their home, saying they are not our nationals. Whereas these people say, no, we have a birthright citizenship demands here. They trace back their history to the 7th century. They claim that they are the descendants of traders from Persia, from India, from China, from Arabian coasts, who set up trading posts along the coast of Arakan. The Bay of Bengal was a sort of mid-staging point in the trading routes from the west to the east. And apart from Kolkata, which was there, and ports in southern Indian coast, on the eastern coast of the Bay of Bengal, there were several ports, and mostly along the Arakan coast. They settled there. These traders, many of them settled there. They intermarried there. And many of the Rohingyas are descendants, progeny of those people. Now, you can contest this. The only way to prove it is to do a genetic test and go back. But then the history of migration is a complex history. The history of human civilization is man on the move, from the first man in Africa somewhere to where man is all over the world. And so therefore, there are also issues of morality and ethics and other things involved in it. I would just quote something from a favorite author of mine, Benedict Anderson. He, in his book, Imagined Communities, offered a very appealing explanation of this phenomenon of what we call nationhood or nationness. He describes nationness as a phenomenon which is essentially a state of the mind, a distillation of one's perception of oneself in relation to the world around him and to the myriad others that cohabit this terrestrial space with him. Trying to explain, analyze, and parse something which can be indeed very abstract is not an easy task. The terms nation, nationality, and nationalism all have proved notoriously difficult to define. And there is no scientific explanation for this. It's just a feeling. I am what I am. This is my home. This is where I belong. And this is something which I have derived from my father, my grandfather, and preceding generations. And this is what I will pass on to my successors. That's a feeling which we can, in Bangladesh, relate to. Okay? And unless we understand this, we are not going to be able to tackle or solve or resolve anything. If we don't understand the roots of a problem, then you're not going to be able to resolve the problem in a way which is viable and acceptable. With those opening remarks, I mean, the outlook for the future is far from over. It's very bleak. I will not say anything more here. I don't want to take more time. There's much to be said, but I think the panelists who are coming here will have lots to say on many of the things that I barely have touched on. With those remarks, I would now like to welcome Ambassador Masood bin Momen. He is the present Foreign Secretary of Bangladesh, a brilliant career diplomat who was last, you have the bios of all the speakers here. and you'll see that he is indeed distinguished, and he's also a thinker. Ambassador Momin, Foreign Secretary, welcome. The screen is
Thank you,
yours, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador Tarek Karim, the UN Resident Coordinator, Mia Seppo, former Foreign Secretary, Ambassador Shahidul Haq, Country Director of the World Bank, Professor Imtiaz, and his colleagues from the academia and the civil society and other stakeholders. At the outset, I would like to express my sincere thanks to the Independent University of Bangladesh for organizing this important event. And the event has provided us with a unique opportunity to share our views, listen to different voices, and get a wider perspective on Rohingya situation. In fact, the title of the event is quite broad and covering a lot of issues. The Rohingya crisis, as we all know, has been a lingering problem for Bangladesh. In fact, we are the worst victim of the crisis created in Myanmar and by Myanmar. Apart from periodic mass exodus, there have been regular influxes of Rohingyas for the last 6 decades. The exodus in 2017 being the latest and the worst one. Presently, we host over 1 million forcibly displaced Rohingyas from Myanmar. In 2017, when these displaced Myanmar nationals were fleeing en masse the violence and atrocities at the hands of their own people, it was Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and the people of Bangladesh who wholeheartedly came forward and extended a temporary shelter and other assistance to these persecuted people. This was a very bold humanitarian gesture on the part of Bangladesh with its own constraints and development aspirations. And particularly happening when during that time in many parts of the world, countries were turning back the migrants and other displaced people in the name of protectionism or security or nationalism, whatever we can term that. In line with the fundamental principles embedded in our constitution to support the oppressed people all over the world and mindful of our own painful sufferings inflicted during our War of Liberation in 1971, we sheltered the hapless Rohingya women, men, and children fleeing the wrath of marauding security offensive in their homeland. Despite our numerous challenges and constraints, we have extended to the Rohingyas all possible humanitarian support with the assistance of the international community and the UN agencies. We also spent over US $350 million from our own budget to develop Bhashan Chor for relocating a portion of the Rohingyas. And this relocation is also completely an interim arrangement that the government was compelled to undertake. The exercise was aimed at decongestion of the overcrowded camps in Cox's Bazar and also for de-risking some of the security concerns which are becoming evident in the recent past. And also given the fact that almost 30,000 young children are also being born every year. Therefore, tremendous pressure of population on a very limited size of land in Cox's Bazar. We should not forget that the government of Bangladesh sheltered these Rohingyas under duress, and all arrangements in Bangladesh for the Rohingyas, be it in Cox's Bazar camps or in Bhashan Chor, are purely temporary in nature. As our leaders have repeatedly mentioned in different international forums, including the United Nations, that the Rohingyas are Myanmar nationals and they must return to their homeland. The crisis is Myanmar's creation, and the solution must be found in Myanmar. In fact, the bilateral arrangements that have been made between the two countries, and especially our former Foreign Secretary is present, who was personally involved in these negotiations. So he can give testimony that we give the highest priority to repatriation. We are already in the 4th year of the Rohingya crisis. Unfortunately, not a single Rohingya so far have been repatriated, despite our sincere efforts and attempts. In fact, 2 attempts were made. The repatriation process has faced repeated setbacks. Although the international community agrees with Bangladesh that repatriation is the only solution, there are many practical impediments that we encountered in making repatriation a reality. Firstly, the lack of genuine political will on the part of Myanmar, despite their commitments and obligations under the bilateral instruments and international law. We did not see much enthusiasm so far in their acts and efforts. Secondly, of course, the absence of a conducive environment in Myanmar, particularly in the Rakhine province, that would provide safety and security to the returnees. That also is an important factor. And that's why Bangladesh has been encouraging international community to engage with Myanmar in a meaningful way for the creation of such a conducive environment that would instill the necessary confidence among the displaced population. Thirdly, the appeasement policy of a few important countries and donors who have influence on Myanmar is also troubling and is definitely not helping the repatriation process. Fourthly, the slow and often politicized accountability and justice process, which we also see as a part of the confidence building measure. But to have the full results, we understand it will take a lot of time, as we have to follow the due process of law. Keeping all these practical realities in mind, Bangladesh is vigorously pursuing all means for the early commencement of repatriation process. Bangladesh is conducting its diplomatic efforts in all fronts, keeping bilateral, regional, and multilateral channels open. We have always underscored that the countries in our neighborhood and beyond have a responsibility in resolving this crisis. We have been proactively engaged with the like-minded countries to come up with strong UN resolutions against Myanmar's atrocities, and also in search of a durable solution, both in the General Assembly of the UN and also in the Human Rights Council. This is an effort to exert collective pressure on Myanmar to heed to the international community for an early resolution of this crisis. And this year, the UN headquarters, as you all know, Bangladesh again successfully managed to get a strong resolution on Myanmar, which was adopted by a large number of votes, even a bigger number or larger number than previous years. And this year's resolution is particularly important in terms of its language as well as the substance. And moreover, we have seen a number of countries, maybe at the periphery, but they have also shifted their long-held position of support. Regionally, we are actively engaged with different countries and different platforms, regional powers, including China, India, Japan, and ASEAN countries. Recently, we have reactivated the tripartite mechanism involving Bangladesh, Myanmar, and China There are some progresses in this most recent meeting. The communication channel of these three countries would remain open, and regular interaction towards finalizing details on repatriation will take place, or hopefully will happen in the coming weeks, as part the arrangements that have been made earlier between the two countries. The role of ASEAN countries, or ASEAN as an institution, also will remain important. Therefore, we have also approached individual ASEAN countries to play a more constructive role in creating the elusive, conducive environment in the Rakhine state, and also in maintaining sustainability of the returnees. In the bilateral front, Bangladesh Foreign Ministry is working closely with the Myanmar Embassy in Dhaka, while Bangladesh Embassy in Yangon also maintaining a close contact with the Myanmar authorities as much as possible for an urgent solution. As agreed, the whole exercise of repatriation would be on voluntary basis, which itself creates additional challenges for creating better conditions in the places of return than the ones the Rohingyas are currently enjoying in Bangladesh. Therefore, Bangladesh reiterated the need to create a conducive environment and better environment in Myanmar, where Rohingyas will have their basic rights, freedom of movement, employment opportunities, and other sustainable livelihoods, and above all, safety and security. If the current situation in Rakhine deteriorates further, or in the camps of Bangladesh, we have seen some security distractions, the prospect of repatriation will be further diminished. And that is why the safety and security and the guarantee of minimum standards of living are all the more important. We are doing whatever necessary on our part to maintain the momentum, but at the end of the day, it will need two to tango, and in this case, perhaps three, because China is also very much with us in this difficult journey. We are observing a disproportionate priority of the international community to focus only on humanitarian assistance in Bangladesh and less on the political solution that is required. And such assistance, the humanitarian assistance, should be made available and in fact reinforced in the Rakhine state to encourage the Rohingyas to return. And this issue, Bangladesh has only one priority and vision, and that is sustainable voluntary repatriation of all the displaced Rohingyas to their homeland in Myanmar in safety and dignity. And we need continued support from all, including the academia and the civil society, and of course, the international community. Only through a concerted effort, we will be able to make repatriation a reality. I thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Foreign Secretary. That was very comprehensive. And I think you have very clearly elucidated the government's stand and policy and the directions it's treading upon. We wish you all success in your continuing efforts. May I now, I'll go in the order they are listed. So if Dr. Mercy Tembon is online, I'll call upon her next as the special guest, country director of the World Bank, Dr. Mercy Tembon.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Ambassador Masood bin Momen, Ambassador Tariq Karim, distinguished speakers and guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. I'd like to start by commending the School of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences at the Independent University of Bangladesh for taking the initiative to organize this conference. Thank you for inviting the World Bank Group to participate and contribute to these discussions. I also offer tribute to the government of Bangladesh for showing great leadership and compassion by opening its doors and providing shelter, food, safety, security, and health facilities to almost over 1 million Rohingya people fleeing from violence in Myanmar, thus saving their lives. The Rohingya influx presents a crisis of unprecedented scale and size. The number of Rohingyas in Teknaf and Ukea Upuzila is about 3 times more than the local population and larger than the population of other countries in the region. They are now camped in an area that was once an elephant corridor. The challenge, which is political, economic, social, has been enormous. And the needs of the Rohingya people are huge. So are the needs of the host communities. And as a response to the crisis, and together with the government of Bangladesh, the United Nations, other development partners, the World Bank has developed 6 projects totaling $590 million US, with the objective to provide basic services, strengthen community resilience and government service delivery capacity, improve access to and utilization of health, nutrition, population services, as well as gender-based violence response to the Rohingya people in the displaced camps, incentivizing social and equitable learning opportunities for the children and adolescents in Cox's Bazar district, scaling up public works programs for both the displaced people and the host communities in Cox's Bazar, and improving infrastructure and strengthening resilience to the impact of climate change and natural disasters. The bank's response is not only aligned with our twin goals of poverty reduction and promotion of shared prosperity, it is also consistent with our fragile conflict and violence strategy that seeks in part to address cross-border crises such as those that have resulted in the Myanmar crisis. So far, the results have been very encouraging. For example, works are underway for building disaster shelters, resilient roads, evacuation routes. We have already provided improved water and sanitation systems to over 22 million people, Rohingya people. By the time projects end, it will provide improved access to 365,000 people and improved sanitation to 171,800 people. Further, it will build 250 kilometers of climate resilient roads, bridges, and multipurpose disaster shelters accessible to 81,000 people, including the host community, and install around 4,000 solar street lights and 975 lightning protection systems. Our support has helped to provide learning opportunities for 112,000 Rohingya children in about 1,239 learning centers managed by UNICEF. Further, around 8,000 not in education, employment, or training youths from the host communities are receiving vocational training and enterprise development support. Before the national shutdown due to COVID, around 700 youth completed training. We are also helping provide 3.6 million people, including 1.1 million Rohingyas in Cox's Bazar, to have better access to health, nutrition, and population services and gender-based violence preventive responses through all tiers of the health delivery system in the host communities, such as in the community, in the union, in the Upuzila and district facilities. You must have heard my colleague Saba Moin, who participated in an earlier session, talk about the details of what we are doing in this project. In the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, we realigned our support to the health program to help prevent and respond to COVID for the Rohingya and for the host populations. This includes support to strengthen early detection, isolation, and case management, set up isolation and treatment units with a focus on pregnant women, as well as mini laboratories and radiological investigative facilities in isolation and treatment units. However, the task is far from finished. Even before the influx, Cox's Bazar had a high poverty rate and was below the national average in education and health indicators. The influx has made things worse, and COVID-19 has increased the vulnerability of the Rohingya and the host community. Going forward, the bank will take an integrated and phased approach, balancing the need for immediate response to the need of the people who are there to mitigate the impact of the situation, both on the Rohingyas and the communities. This would mean a renewed focus on creating jobs in an already lagging region, economic transformation that involves promoting inclusive growth for the Cox's Bazar economy, improving productivity, which is a key factor for economic growth, building the human capital of the displaced people and the host communities, improving social cohesion between the refugees and the host communities, and strengthening government systems. Bangladesh should not be left alone in this journey. They've already done a lot, as the ambassador from Foreign Affairs talked about, and we think that it is important that the support that Bangladesh has while the refugees are still here should continue both on the political, the economic, and the social side. First, there is need for greater burden share between Bangladesh, its regional neighbors, the international partners in managing the political part of it, but it's also managing the cost consequences that relate to security, the environment and ecology, social cohesion, and the economic benefits, so that Bangladesh can continue to flourish as it has done always in the past. Second, the global community must step in to support the Rohingyas and Bangladesh to pursue the safe, voluntary, dignified, and sustainable return back to Myanmar. And finally, the bank stands ready to support Bangladesh in the implementation of the programs that will benefit both the displaced people while they are still in Bangladesh and the communities that have hosted them through a partnership approach that connects the humanitarian and the development. With this, I would like to stop here, and I thank you for giving us the opportunity to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mercy, for your comprehensive and very informative statement, and for your assurance of staying engaged with the government of Bangladesh and in this process, as indeed you have been, the World Bank being a major donor in the efforts at addressing this problem within Bangladesh. Thank you very much. I now invite Ms. Mia Seppo. She is the head of the UN system in Bangladesh, the UN resident coordinator, for her statement.
Thank you. Let me start by thanking the Independent University of Bangladesh for inviting me to be part of this closing session, which is always very risky because I haven't been part of the very rich conversation that has taken place today. Let me acknowledge that we have a very distinguished group of people and experts joining in this conversation. Chief guest, the Foreign Secretary of Bangladesh, the former Foreign Secretary of Bangladesh, and Ambassador Tariq Karim, and many other prominent speakers from academia. I'm very much looking forward to this discussion. The subject of this closing session, the post-camp directions and visions, is very interesting. The UN talks about 3 durable solutions for refugees, often for post-camp situations. These are usually voluntary repatriation, second, third country resettlement, and third, local integration. The post-camp vision and solutions that we share and continue working towards is primarily the safe, voluntary, dignified, and sustainable return of the Rohingya refugees from Bangladesh to Myanmar. This is what many Rohingya refugees in the camps tell us they want for their future, and this remains the shared priority for the UN and the government of Bangladesh. As have been said so many times, but it's always worth repeating, this crisis started in Myanmar, and that is where the solution lies. We know that the situation in Myanmar remains complex and challenging, particularly following the intensification of armed conflict between the Myanmar armed forces and the Arakan army, as well as the evolving impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and maybe the outcome of the elections as well. But we have to continue moving forward. We have taken note of the recent discussions among the 3 governments referred to by the Foreign Secretary, recognizing this dialogue as crucial in making progress to create conducive conditions for return. At the same time, we also continue to encourage the resumption of dialogue between the Myanmar authorities and the Rohingya refugees in Cox's Bazar to build their confidence about return. To make repatriation sustainable, Rohingya refugees must be consulted on and central to this process. I'm often asked what the UN is doing in Myanmar to support reintegration and to create conditions for return. And this is indeed an important and valid question. We are responding to a multitude of humanitarian needs under the framework of the Myanmar Humanitarian Response Plan in Rakhine State. This includes providing the basics, food, and where feasible, healthcare, non-food items, and a range of other services. When discussing the Rohingya, we must keep in mind that an estimated 600,000 continue to face significant challenges in Rakhine State, including 110,000 in internally displaced persons camps. Others are in exile across the region. At the same time, the UN is also continuing to engage and support Myanmar to create conditions for return. This is critical, and the international community must keep doing the same. Through UNDP and UNHCR, we implement projects to improve conditions for return and consult with communities on the ground. The government of Myanmar has so far approved a total of 75 projects in around 40 villages. These are small development projects and aim to address the needs of all communities. We know that this alone will not be enough, and more things need to be done moving forward. The UN, including the High Commissioner for Refugees in his address to the Security Council last year, has made some very concrete and strategic proposals to the government of Myanmar to create lasting change. Let me highlight a few of these. He called for proposal to justify contacts between the Myanmar authorities and the refugee communities, as already mentioned. There was a proposal to link the small projects that the UN is running in Rakhine State with the refugee community in Cox's Bazar, to be more strategic and to create more options for solutions. This could help give more confidence about return for refugees. We have also encouraged the government of Myanmar to make progress on areas that are very important for the Rohingya people, including through the implementation of the Rakhine Advisory Commission recommendations. This is on key issues such as freedom of movement, citizenship, and the solutions to the IDPs. We also know that accountability and justice for the Rohingya is an important area, including through the ongoing work of the ICJ and the International UN Fact-Finding Mission on Myanmar. While sustainable repatriation remains the primary objective, it may still take time for many Rohingya to be able to return to Myanmar from Bangladesh. The focus, therefore, also has to be on what we do now, what we do in the present, which will help the refugees prepare for their post-camp lives. In view of this, the UN believes we need to continue ensuring a well-coordinated, comprehensive, and well-funded humanitarian response in Cox's Bazar. This means addressing the continuing humanitarian and protection needs of the refugees, while also providing support to affected Bangladeshi people whose lives and livelihoods have been affected by the large number of Rohingya people. We hope to soon release the joint response plan for the Rohingya humanitarian crisis for 2021, which will set out a comprehensive plan of action and the needs for the coming years. This will be the fourth one-year plan of its kind since the onset of the crisis in August 2017. The plans have been one of the best funded humanitarian responses globally in recent years by the donor community, and the UN will continue to do everything that we can to ensure that adequate resources are mobilized. The plan is forward-looking, recognizing that what we do in the camps now will affect the post-conflict future, the post-camp future. Everything we do now, therefore, must be with the view of the future of the Rohingya and helping them retain a vision for a future, as well as for the communities that host them. Let me note 4 main ways that we are doing this in Cox's Bazar. First, we are ensuring that the Rohingya refugees have decent education. Under the government's leadership, the Myanmar curricula project has been approved. And here, let me give special credit to former Foreign Secretary and present Foreign Secretary for your solid support and leadership in making this happen. The pilot on the Myanmar curricula is ready to be rolled out once the COVID-19 situation so permits. This will be critical for ensuring children retain linguistic, educational, and cultural ties to Myanmar, also while developing their skills and capacities. Second, in close consultation with the government, we ensure Rohingya can learn skills that will increase their capabilities and keep them engaged in productive activities. The UN is working on a skills framework in addition to what is already ongoing in the camps. The framework will strongly consider the skills and capacities that the Rohingya refugees will need for more sustainable reintegration and to pursue opportunities in Myanmar. Third, we continue to try and ensure a safe and secure environment in the camps, as well as for the Rohingya living nearby. Keeping people safe and productive, not idle, will ensure that they use their time well and do not turn to any negative activities because of idleness, frustration, and lack of opportunities. The maintenance and the continuation of the Rohingya volunteer programs, which underpin our work in the camps, will continue to be central to these efforts. Lastly, we are continuing to ensure that the environment in which the Rohingya live is protected and where possible, restored, as well as any facilitation of the facilities and the infrastructure in the camp will be utilized by local people after the Rohingya are able to return. And I'm sure you took note of my colleague Mercy's references to all the work which is going on in terms of development, investment, and building these facilities. This is indeed a priority. Cox's Bazar district was already vulnerable before the Rohingya crisis due to its, I'm almost done, its coastline of the Bay of Bengal and a landscape consisting of flat plains and sandy hills. But we recognize it's more vulnerable since the Rohingya influx. Through the UN Safe Floods program and other initiatives, we will continue working to safe approaches to fuel and energy, plus landscape restoration and livelihood projects. This includes through the rollout of LPG stoves across the camps and in some areas of the host community to eliminate the use of firewood. We are involved in huge reforestation in the camp areas together with the forestry department. And importantly, there is work going on to protect wildlife, including the Asian elephants who have traditionally lived in this forest as their corridors. In this situation, we have used elephant response teams made up of 600 volunteers to prevent human-elephant incidents. I want to close with two quotes. And the first quote I actually added based on the comments by Ambassador Tariq Karim regarding nationness and identity. I think all of us collectively learned a huge amount from a 22-year-old poet at the inauguration of a powerful president in an important country. And the poet, Amanda Gorman, said, "Being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it." And I want to quote that because it links very well to your comments about nationness. But the other quote, of course, is from Tagore. And Tagore said, "You can't cross the sea merely by standing and staring at the water." So I want to thank everyone here and in the audience for trying to cross the sea, both in working towards a solution for the Rohingya people, and in the meantime, working with us and collectively to ensure that while they are in Bangladesh, they can lead safe and dignified lives. We know that the road traveled in the last 40 years with successive displacement of the Rohingya people to Bangladesh has been hard. We also know that the road ahead is not easy, but we keep moving forward together, both in the camps now and to build that post-camp future towards a safe, sustainable, dignified, and voluntary return of the Rohingya to Myanmar. Let this be the last time that the Rohingya people are expelled to flee Myanmar and seek safety and protection in Bangladesh. And let's keep that in mind in what we do today to get to that future. I thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mia, for your words of wisdom, your comprehensive presentation of how the UN is engaged, how it is engaging with pragmatism as well as with an eye to the future. Thank you very much. I now will go on to the presentations. There are three presentations, or four presentations actually. The first by Mr. Asif Munir. He's a rights activist of migration and displacement analyst. Mr. Munir.
Good evening to you all. First, I would like to thank the Department of Social Sciences and Humanities, IUB, for organizing this and to keep up with the momentum of the challenging times regarding the Rohingya population. It's important that we keep on discussing and looking at different solutions. I'm humbled to be among such distinguished speakers here and panelists and as well as guests. And thank you for the opportunity to speak here. On the outset, perhaps what I would like to say is something not completely new, but perhaps to reinforce some of the discussions that you have had throughout the day. And again, you'd be hearing from the other panelists. I would like to focus on 4 areas. I'll be aware of the time limits as well. So first is on livelihood. And I'm sure some discussions on that have already taken place in terms of the humanitarian and development nexus. For all these 4 areas, perhaps looking at the different lessons so far, even if we think about Bangladesh and the Rohingya population, there's no clear solutions yet. We can discuss a lot and we can hope that the issues are resolved. But whatever we say perhaps are sometimes wishful thinking, sometimes we feel that there would be some results. So we already know about the tensions in Cox's Bazar between Rohingya and the local population, but are there solutions to look at? And that's why I pose questions for us to think for the future as well, that limited peaceful coexistence, is it possible? Do we see examples? I'll come back to some of the myths and realities, especially when we see the reflections in the local and national media in terms of how Rohingyas are projected. But we could look for solutions even within the camps, within the surrounding areas. Of course, the decongestion, which the Honorable Foreign Secretary was mentioning, is something of a reality, but still there would be a population still remaining in Cox's Bazar for quite some time. So looking at the balance of the relationship in terms of livelihood, local livelihood opportunities, even if we think about Bhashanchar and other places around Cox's Bazar. So the need for joint efforts and looking at where can we work together. There is a common history of the region, whether coming from Arakan a few hundred years ago when Cox's Bazar was established, or people moving from this region or settling in Myanmar. And that's the narrative that Myanmar always tries to push forward, that these are Bengalis. The fact remains that in terms of the historical perspective, there are commonalities among the Cox's Bazar people, Bangladeshis and Rohingyas, even though there are distinct features of their linguistics, of their history, culture, and cultural practice. So that's one of the areas to look at in terms of livelihood. The other, which the Honorable Foreign Secretary was mentioning about, is the decongestion. Whether it's the Bhashanchar model, I would say it's a model, it's a pilot model, but also we heard from the World Bank, and among the World Bank project, there is an initiative for infrastructure, especially for the people who are affected by natural disasters or other kinds of vulnerability in Cox's Bazar, which includes shelters, cyclone shelters, or shelter structures, semi-permanent structures for both the local population as well as the Rohingya population. And there comes a little bit of notion of semi-permanent features, whether we consider from our perspective, from Bangladesh perspective, that these are temporary. It does give a notion for the population, for the affected, of a semi-permanence, perhaps in the interim measure. When we talk about interim, that's a big question mark. How long is the interim? Is it 2 years, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years? We don't know. But the fact remains that it is going to be some kind of a in-between phase where this will give these populations some kind of a semi-permanent nature. Think about the population who have voluntarily moved to Bhashanchar. Of course, their final destination is Myanmar, but they wouldn't want to be relocated in another island, another country. Rather than they would really continue or prefer to remain at least where they are now. So it's for people who keep on moving. Of course, their life is on a balance, but still they would like some kind of settling down to happen in their lives and for their children's and kins. So that's one important area to look at. In terms of the decongestion, but also the semi-permanent nature, I'm also wondering that in terms of the fencing of the camps, and the question that I asked to myself is that for whom and why? And will it really solve the problem? When we talk about the law and order situation in the camps, partly it's because of the congestion of so many people living together in the same place, same sheds, same locality, both for Bangladeshis, but mostly for the Rohingyas in Cox's Bazar, especially for Kutupalong. But would the fencing really solve the problem of the tensions, the law and order situation? And that's why the question is for whom? I don't have a clear answer, but it doesn't seem like the fencing would really solve the problem. Might actually increase the problem. We know that the law and order situation gets volatile, especially when it gets dark, when in the evenings, when the humanitarian actors are actually moving out and they're compelled to move out because that's a government regulation. The human trafficking groups, the drug trafficking groups, no matter what we say, that the Rohingyas are involved, who manages these drug cartels, the trade, the human trafficking trade. It's not that the leaders or the godfathers are actually Rohingya godfathers. They may be pawns, but definitely they're not. They may be the soldiers, but they're not really the movers and shakers. And then the last point regarding this congestion is that will the decluttering resolve the key challenges? We have looked at the issues how we deal with it in Cox's Bazar, whether it's Bhasanchar, whether it's X Island, whether it's another location. You have to look at the same replication of the complex nature of the coordination and the humanitarian response and the law and order situation. Remaining in Cox's Bazar is also not the solution, but just decongestion within Bangladesh or within that region is also not a longer-term solution, at least not maybe in the interim measures. Third is the accountability, and then I go into the more macro perspective. I have 2 points on this accountability and this last point as well. So in terms of accountability, and I know that the former Foreign Secretary, sir, he also covered the issue of the accountability. So in terms of the focus, of course, also needs to continue on the ICJ, the International Commission of Jurists, and ICC, and the Bangladesh government and the civil society and other activists, rights activists have been upfront on this. And there are limited success, but this will also take time. But nevertheless, this needs to be pursued. But question remains, how slow, how long? And whether slow and steady wins the race in this case for the Rohingya population. This might be very long, and we should brace ourselves for that. Previous experiences do not tell us that issues are resolved if they are in the positive light, that these happen in the shorter term or in shorter time period. And then the issue which was also mentioned by the Honorable Foreign Secretary is the working at different levels, regionally, whether through ASEAN, whether through globally, whether UN, multilaterally. But then again, question of pinch of salt is whether the bilateral process or recently the trilateral, what benefit, and probably needs to be evaluated. That last 2-3 years, maybe there are slow steps, but are there progress and what we could do better, even if we do not abandon the bilateral process, but are there ways to look at how we could revigorate or rejuvenate the process so that it does bring in slightly more results than it has brought so far, or the progress that has been made. And something that I question myself also sometimes, that we have heard in all the UN General Assemblies, wonderful key points established by our Honorable Prime Minister. But we don't always see that translated into the different strategic moves and the processes. Perhaps there is from the government side, but it's not very clear from the outside. Very clear points since 2017 throughout until now, very clear points, strategic points mentioned for solutions at the international level, at the national level. These are not easy, but how are these really translated? So that's one of the questions I have in mind, not very clear to me, but needs to be there. And last point that I want to come up with, which relates to the other issues, the important aspect of the voice and agency of the Rohingya population themselves. Now we talk about listening to them, about involving them, But so far, whether internationally or in Bangladesh, there's no truly representational group or individuals or an entity. And that is very important to look at the solutions. When we talk about bilateral or trilateral, where is the representation of the Rohingya in that? Where is the Rohingya population's representation in academic discussions like this or in policy level discussions? Are they not capable of contributing? They're probably not organized. But then again, that's again what Mia was mentioning about skills. Perhaps that's one of the areas where within the efforts made, whether through the government, whether through the UN and other actors, in terms of giving them a little bit more of a voice or a skill, negotiation skills, leadership skills, and perhaps they have it within them also. That need not be seen as a threat. When we heard of the gathering, the big gathering, which was much of the talk of the country and the local and national media, and some leaders coming forward, was seen as a threat. That need not be. These are not militant groups or militant representatives we're talking about. It's about people's participation, and it's about the Rohingya giving them a voice. And there I come back to the point about the demonizing that we have seen, particularly in Bangladesh. And I particularly would like to acknowledge one of your faculty members who wrote here, Professor Dr. Zakir Hossain Raju, about this us and them. I very much stand for that we do see them us and them. We do have a common culture, and then we see them as aliens sometimes, or they're the cause of all the trouble. They're not. Sometimes we are as well. And perhaps it's no point in putting blame onto particular one group. That's kind of an escapist route. So that's something that needs to be looked at for the future. Of course, there will be challenges, and this will keep on increasing perhaps. But there's no point in putting all the blame on the Rohingya population themselves. And particularly, I think about the local and national media here. We often talk and listen to the media, and it's very frustrating to hear that they're the cause of all the trouble. They're having a very wonderful life here in the camps, and they're doing all the business of the drugs and all the criminal activities. Even in the recent months, the gang wars that we have seen between the Arsa group and the Munna group and other groups. And who knows if these will be replicated in Bhashanchar or not. But these are small number of people who have vested interests, and they're putting the population at threat, not just Bangladeshis, but for the Rohingyas themselves as well. Many of those who are actually wanting to move out to Bhashanchar, they are fighting for their lives. They came to Bangladesh to save their lives, and they see that even in the camps, their lives are threatened. So they feel that they need to, find a little bit of more safe space, literally to save their lives. With that, I would say that the collaboration that's needed of the different levels, including this voice about the Rohingyas at the international level as well. We have met and talked to some of the diaspora representatives, Rohingya, but what seems like is that as they're not really organized or represented in the camps, internationally, not also very kind of sort of a coherent and coordinated effort at the international level. There are different diaspora groups, whether in the UK or in Canada or even at the New York level or Geneva level, and even at the regional level, but they do not have a one voice. That's reality. People have different choices and different perspectives. But whether at the international level, Friends of Rohingyas could also support this process of bringing these voices together. They can also have an influencing factor at the international level or regional level outside the government, if we're trying to think outside of the box. So again, issue of Rohingya voice and their representation is very important. These are the 4 key points I had, and thank you very much. And good evening to you all. Looking forward to listening to the other panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Asad Munir, for a very refreshing, non governmental view, the view from the other side, which is very important. I think even governments have to take note of that. The views of the ordinary citizens and how they view, if for nothing else, to make sure that this does not spin out of control and become something which becomes a different problem that has to be resolved. I would now like to call on Professor Dr. Amina Mohsin of the Department of International Relations at Dhaka University. Madam, for your presentation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. A very good evening to all of you. I would like to begin by thanking Dr. Imtiaz Hussain for kindly inviting me and the organizers of this conference. And I was asked to speak on post-repatriation. So I guess I'll focus on that, the post-repatriation scenario. And I was looking at this, that can the Rohingya circle remain unbroken? And I was thinking about it, that I don't know what made you, perhaps you would like to elaborate on it later on, that what made you term it as a circle rather than as a cycle. Because if you talk of a cycle, it is something which is closed, but I don't see it as being closed. It is something which is evolving. And when we talk about cycles, one can talk about evolving phenomena and evolving happenings. And the Rohingya crisis is very much a happening crisis. It's not meant as a critique. I think it's just a difference in perception, how we look at things. So as when I talk about the post-repatriation scenario, I mean, this is essentially based on my research with the Rohingyas, and particularly the research that I carried on with the Rohingya women. So I'll be talking from what they said to me and what I gathered from them. So when I say that home and beyond, home is not something that one can, particularly when you have been uprooted from your home and you have been condemned to a life of, or you can say that forced into a life of refugeehood, or being a dispossessed person, whatever you call it, or being statelessness. Once you want to go back, it must come with the fullness of time. It must come with the fullness of home. So that's why I was looking at this circle, and I was thinking that if the fullness of time, the ripeness of time, and the ripeness of home is, if you're encapsulating it with the future or not, because it is supposed to be a futuristic panel. Well, if I come to my own, my findings, I mean, home and beyond, when I say, I was really, during the initial period, I was really struck by an observation which a woman in the Rohingya camp made to me. She came up to me and she said to me, Appa, which means sister, Appa, look, you are happy here, you are safe here because your king is your king. And this is what, this is the term she's used, Apne Raja, Apne Raja. So, I don't know why she used the word king, but whatever it is, I mean, I have translated it like that your king is your own king. So, this sense of ownership, once they go back, it is important for them because to have this sense of ownership in the system into which they are going back. And this is something which not only the Myanmar state, but the international community too would have to look into. Asif was talking about voice. So, like they already have a voice. They are articulating their voice. And this lady, this woman, she was fully conscious of it. And when she said that, look, because you have your own king, that's why you are safe here. That's why you are happy over here. So this feeling of us versus them was very much there. And as Ambassador Tariq Karim was pointing out about the nationness of the nation, so I would say that the ness of the nation is very much existing there, but how do you look at the nation, that is something very different. And it might be an imagined community, but then that imagination or that imagined community or subjectivity is based on so many objective factors and objective variables which are around you. And among them, I think one of the most important thing is the sense of ownership and ownership of the system, that you belong, that whoever is speaking for you might not be from your own ethnic background, but you have a voice within the system. That is very important. And this is something, since the international representatives from the international community and the world body are also over here present today, so I would urge them to factor this in. Then this is something that they have participation, and they are able to articulate their voices once they go back at whatever level it might be. Secondly, the women, they constantly, it's not only the women, but also the men. And I was talking to children also, like teenagers, they talked about livelihood, which Asif elaborated a lot. But they talked, when they were talking about livelihood, they were talking about the ponds, the fish, the agriculture. My colleague Niloy is also over here. And we have together, we have done many of the field visits to the camps. They constantly talked about, how well off they were there. And they had money, they used to go to the marketplaces, they had their own means of livelihood. So this is again something, like when we talk about a post-repatriation phase, I always keep on saying that they cannot just go from one camp to another camp. That's why I said that, when you go back, it must be in the fullness of time, in the fullness of home. And it must be a home where the livelihood is ensured for them. And also, like, they talked about the freedom of movement, which they lacked. And when they talked about freedom of movement, they constantly pointed out about, that they were not able to worship. And religion, many of us know that religion is a very important factor for the Rohingya people. When we talk about identities, we do factor in many variables. That's why I said that the nation is, whether you call them a people or whether you call them a nation or an ethnic community, depends upon us. But each identity, it sieves its seeds or picks up its seeds from various elements. And my observation is that apart from language, culture, I found that, they seek much solace in their religion. And it was a critical factor for them that they were not able to practice their religion in a free manner. So this is also something one has to see, because one, if you look at I was listening to Shahab's response to the general sitting over here. He pointed out that, the Buddhist nationalism that is over there, the fundamentalism that is ingrained over there. It is that, and we are seeing nationalisms across the world taking refuge into religion in a very strong way. So how does a nationalism or a people who are in the making of an identity of their own, which is there, I would say, which is already there, but which they're not in a position to articulate, how do they fight that hegemony? That is also something one has to look into. And that's why I'm saying that this freedom is very important. Whether Myanmar moves towards a secular state or not, that is very important for us, because it is very important in the post-repatriation phase that what shape the Myanmar state takes, that is very critical for us to observe, because otherwise We can't break this cycle or circle. They'll keep on coming. One has to ensure that. And the global community has, again, I would say that the global community has a major responsibility over here. After all, Rohingyas are not a project. And it's not that you can just save a people by giving them humanitarian assistance. One has to take a long-term vision, and we are talking of crimes against humanity, and under international law, this is not a bilateral issue between Bangladesh and Myanmar. This is an international crime, and we must keep that in perspective. Then access to services, these are the things that came out through the voices of the women and the people in the camp. They talked about how they did not have any access to health services. Pregnant women, they could not go, like access doctors, medical facilities, lack of education. We are talking of education in the camps, and we are talking of education so that they can have linkages while they go back to Myanmar. But Rohingya women and the Rohingya people in the camps, they told us that while in Myanmar, they are not allowed to go to schools. And they do not have access to education over there. And particularly for girls and women, they told us that because of lack of security, they do not allow their girls to go to schools. So these are things, when we talk about the development of a community, the development of a people, how they would be able to access these services, well, these have to be ensured not only in Bangladesh or in Bhashan Chor or in Cox's Bazar, but these have to be ensured in Myanmar as well. Then freedom from fear. I mean, this is something which came out very strongly, because persecution and safety. One of the little boys, which one of my colleagues, Atik, with whom I'm working on the Rohingya crisis, he wrote a beautiful blog on, this little boy. He said that once he reached Bangladesh, he said that at last I'm safe, not, like no one is going to come and kill me now. No matter how bad the situation is over here, at least I would be able to sleep at night and not think that someone is going to kill me. So, like these kind of things, the security, safety, these are very important issues. I think that one needs to factor in that what kind of situation that they will go back to once they are in Myanmar. And finally, it is about justice. What justice means to the Rohingya women or the Rohingya people, we are talking about accountability, we are talking about compensation, but this is something one really needs to probe deeply into. What justice actually means to them. I mean, when they say that had to be chai, but I think this is one area that we have not really probed much into. That would it mean all these things: voice, access to services, freedom, freedom from fear, the space creation for them, the voice creation for them, and a time when they would be able to have their own king or their own representative. These are different issues. I mean, one really has to look into it. And I look forward to a day when Rohingya women, children, and men, they would be able to say that, yes, we are in a position now when we have a king of our own. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Amina Mohsin, for your very perceptive and thoughtful remarks here. And yes, certainly the point you mentioned is very, very valid, that they don't want to go back from one camp to another. At the same time, let's not forget that they were existing merely in another camp, and they would have continued to exist in that fashion if the Myanmar government or authorities or forces had not come down on them and forced them to flee for their lives. That is home. You stay there, you stick on as long as you can, as long as your life is okay. That is, it has to be made bearable. And you know, when the British High Commissioner this morning said they all want to go home, so yes, they must go home. But what is home? How do you define home? I think that is what we all have to look into, whether we in Bangladesh or the international community. It is my privilege now, and I'm really delighted to call on Dr. Shamsal Bari. He is a veteran in the field of dealing with refugees, and he has warned me that he has a somewhat two-part presentation, but he will try and condense it. Dr. Bari, welcome. The screen is yours.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to see friendly faces in the table of panelists.
And I'm starting with a deal of trepidation because, first of all, I think we have breached the time limit already quite a bit. And what I wanted to say, I don't know whether it fits in at the end part of the session, concluding session, because this is more futuristic and I'm looking more at the past and try to, earn some lessons from there and reflect with them on the Rohingya situation. But nevertheless, let me try to say as quickly as I can. I must say that when I accepted to speak at this gathering about my experience with large scale and protracted refugee situations, I was quite delighted that I was asked, but now I'm afraid because I don't think I can encapsulate all the experience I've gathered over the 20 plus years that I spent at UNHCR and with so many refugee groups that I have the opportunity to deal with all over the world. I think it's important for this gathering, and in fact, I don't know, maybe the earlier sessions probably would have been a better place for me to share the knowledge that I think comes from dealing with refugees all over the world and learn lessons from them, which I think is always relevant in every refugee situation. Because when I worked for the refugees in different places, I always could refer back to what we did on other situations. It is in that context, I thought it would be useful and agreed to speak, but I don't know how to go about it in the time that we have. 10 minutes is not going to be enough. And if I continue to speak longer, we probably will go much beyond the time limit that has been set for this session. But let me quickly say that after I came back, that I retired from the UN in 1999. And before that, I had been working almost all over the world with refugees because I was dealing with issues, mainly issues of protection, which related to refugees everywhere in the world, and issues of assistance and issues of solutions. But then I was also dealing beyond issues. I was also dealing with actual situations, which therefore brought me into working with many, many refugee groups. Let me quickly name some of them. My first involvement was, of course, with the Rohingya refugees when I joined UNHCR in 1987. And immediately I fell into dealing with a very large group of refugees from Indochina, which included the Vietnamese, the Cambodians, and the Laotians. Then I had to deal with, I had the opportunity to deal with the Tamil refugees, the Irian Jaya refugees from Indonesia to Papua New Guinea, Afghan refugees, the Turkish Kurd and Iraqi Kurd refugees, Sahrawi refugees in Western Sahara, and of course, Palestinian refugees to some extent. In addition, I had the opportunity to work for Somali refugees as the UN Special Rapporteur for Somalia at the Human Rights Council. Now, in order to bring all this information together and see how it relates to the Rohingyas is going to be extremely difficult. So please forgive me if you see that I'm rushing, because I think it's important that we get some of the backgrounds of the refugee groups from which I'll try to draw some lessons. Of course, the first group was Rohingya refugees. I was known as Mr. Rohingya man in UNHCR because I was the first person to deal with the Rohingyas and went back with the last group of Rohingyas in 1978 to Mangdao in Burma, as it was then known. And then I got involved later in 1991 in quite a big way with the Rohingya refugees because there was a crisis, which I don't want to go into it, which brought me to Bangladesh to negotiate with the government on disembarkation of a French group of doctors who had arrived in a 747 plane in Chittagong without permission. And that gave me an opportunity, after having resolved the problem quite amicably with the government at that time. I had the opportunity to go to Cox's Bazar, and there I had the opportunity also to pick up all the groups of refugees I found sitting on the banks of the Teknaf River and brought them to what later became the camp in Kutupalong. So therefore you see that I have a great deal of emotions on the subject, but let me not deal with the Rohingyas because I was not, I retired before the last group came. And I was very happy to see that the first two groups in 78 and 91, they all went back. And I very much hope that the last group would also do the same. The other groups I dealt with the Vietnamese boat people. I think it's important to know, to learn a bit about it in order to understand how refugee situations get resolved. The Vietnamese boat people are part of the Indo-Chinese refugee group, which began to flow out of the countries, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, after the American forces were defeated in 1975 in Vietnam. And that created a very huge number of refugees. I wish I could go into details because it's very interesting to compare them with the situation of the Rohingyas. All I can say is that we had to, it took a great deal of time to resolve that problem. The Vietnamese boat people saga that began, say, right after 1975, continued like the other two groups, the Cambodians and the Laotians, for the next 15 years. It was not till 1990s, from 1975, that all these different groups, found solution. And interestingly, because there was no possibility for these people to stay locally and there was no possibility for them to go back home, resettlement was their only option. And it shows how the cooperation of the international communities are essential in finding solutions to many refugee problems. And this was possible for the Indo-Chinese because of the US leadership and all its Western allies that helped and resulted in the resettlement of most of these people. And the numbers were very large, much larger than the Rohingyas. There were 2.5 million Vietnamese boat people who were resettled abroad. And I feel that since that was my largest and longest involvement, I feel I have been able to touch the lives of all the refugees, Vietnamese boat people, and to some extent with the Cambodians who came in such difficult condition from the Pol Pot regime. I wish I had time also to talk about their suffering and compare them to the suffering that the Rohingyas came with, in 2017. And the Laotian refugees, particularly those who had collaborated with the American forces, their conditions in the camp, and then their joy that we saw in seeing all these people finding solution, even though it took a great deal of time over the years. But the most important point there is that there was a tremendous involvement of the international community. Two international conferences took place, Indo-Chinese conferences, 1979 and 1989, without which these problems could not have been resolved. So international solidarity and cooperation therefore assumes a tremendously important position in finding solutions. And I see, I don't know, there's a need to reflect as to whether there's a continuity in this. And I think there is, but it would be a good thing to be able to talk about it in the context of the solutions that we are searching for the Rohingyas. Now, the other group was the Tamil refugees. Let me not go into the details. Their numbers are also quite large. Almost 800,000 Tamils had to flee over the years, and it took about 25 years before any resolution could be found. And that resolution came from a very violent crashing in 2009 of the Tamil Ilam movement by the Sri Lankan armed forces. So you see how different refugee groups get resolved in different ways. And then the Afghan refugees, which was the largest refugee group I had to work with, as the director of an area which covered a large area, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, North Africa, and Middle East, Kaspaname as it was known. We had these Afghans almost everywhere. And therefore I had a great deal of involvement. And there's so much that we could learn about how large refugee situations are dealt with by the countries, receiving countries, and also by the international communities. I wish I had time also to talk about the Turkish Kurd refugees. And if there are teachers here who are teaching students about refugee problems, I would very much urge you that you talk about this, the situation of Turkish Kurds. For the last 40 years, the situation that they're going through, and I had a very, very deep involvement and many stories that I could relate to you, and very, very human stories, which are important to know in order to understand refugee situation. I was happy to hear Amina talk about refugee sentiments, and I wish I could share mine also. I could particularly remember the Sahrawi refugees in Western Sahara in Algeria, and the time I spent in the camps under the sky in Western Sahara, and talk to the people and listen to their aspirations. Unfortunately, those aspirations still remain aspiration, because it's now 40 years that both the Turkish Kurds and the Sahrawi refugees remain without a solution. And you will see how international politics is important in solution, because with the Western Sahara refugees, one of the last act of the outgoing president of the US did was to give recognition of Morocco's claim over Western Sahara. That brought to an end politically, diplomatically, the aspirations of the people of Western Sahara to fight and get their freedom. Anyway, let me now quickly, I really will try, Mr. Chairman, as quickly as possible to draw some lessons. Number one lesson, of course, is that all large refugee flows are caused by specific reasons, and unless those reasons are dealt with properly, there cannot be any quick solution. As a result of which many have been resolved, many remain to be resolved. We must understand that refugee situations that are large scale in nature and protracted in nature do not get resolved. That's one point that we have to bear in mind. I very much hope that we in Bangladesh will be able to get the Rohingyas back home again, as we did in 71 and 91. But we must also remember there are many refugee situations that fester over a long period of time. Number two is voluntary repatriation is undeniable the best solution for any large scale refugee group, but it's only possible if the situation in the country of origin, and we have discussed that. I'm sure throughout this conference, this has been discussed time and again. And there are people here in Bangladesh who talk about the possibility of, third country resettlement and local integration. It must remember that no large-scale refugee situation has ever been resolved by local integration. Third country resettlement has been possible only when local integration was totally impossible, as in the case of the Indo-Chinese. And Bangladesh, I think, did the right thing of taking a position right from the beginning that there would be no local integration and that there would be no resettlement, even though earlier on, many of my former colleagues in the UN had argued that Bangladesh should have opted for third country resettlement. I don't think that would have been the right thing, mainly because we must remember there are many other Rohingyas who remain in Myanmar, and that for them will be a pull factor. And the fourth lesson that I would like to draw, and I have 10 of them, I'll quickly go over them. This is the fourth. Host countries normally take the lead to negotiate with the country of origin with or without UN help. Bangladesh has decided to resolve it bilaterally as it is its prerogative to do so. But I wish UN was involved because I very much remember our engagement, my engagement in particular, in all the preparation, the process of solution, and what we did to prepare the refugees to go back home if there was a possibility of going back home. Because promoting repatriation is also an art that I think we in UNHCR have earned over a long period of time. And I don't know whether that is being shared with the Bangladesh authorities, but I don't see any indication that indeed that is being done. But this would have helped. But as I said, of course, it's the prerogative of the government. And the fifth point I wanted to draw your attention to, there are countries in every refugee situation that are more interested in promoting early solution than others. And in the case of Bangladesh, I am happy to see that the countries that are most directly interested, India, China, and Japan, and plus the ASEAN countries, are being very deftly handled. Even though UN help has not been sought, Bangladesh is dealing with these countries quite well, and I hope what we have seen recently in terms of the trilateral meeting that took place last week between Myanmar, Bangladesh, and China would continue to show positive results. And of course, the sixth point that has been discussed at this meeting today is, if bilateralism doesn't work, what are the other options? Bangladesh has, of course, the option of taking the accountability path, which it has so far not fully utilized, which is to go through the ICJ, International Court of Justice, and the ICC. Another path is what I would urge you to consider, the Bangladesh authorities, is the possibility of a comprehensive plan of action type of approach that we took to deal with the Vietnamese boat people and also the other Indo-Chinese, and which for the Vietnamese boat people, it resulted in a comprehensive plan of action, which made it possible for us to arrange for refugees not to take the boat and leave for countries abroad directly. So that was a way of, yes, I'll bring it down quickly.
Wind up in 30 seconds.
2 minutes. Yes, in 2 minutes. And the seventh learning that I thought should be underlined is that UN plays a critical role in both assistance and solutions. And for the Rohingyas, the UN played a role in raising funds, and there is a need for the UN to continue to play that role. And I'm afraid that international assistance, the donor attention to such situations wane, as we have seen on many occasions as far as funding is concerned, and this should not happen. I feel encouraged by what I heard from my UN colleagues and the World Bank colleague who spoke earlier. And large-scale refugee situations normally throw up problems of multidimensional nature. And these are, so apart from humanitarian needs, there are many other needs, particularly that has been discussed here, is the impact of large refugees on the environment. I recall my deep involvement in the reforestation project that was supported by the World Bank in Pakistan, and we can learn from other examples. And to conclude, I'll conclude on a personal note, and I'll take 1 minute, Mr. Chairman. I consider myself lucky to have worked for UNHCR. It was rewarding to be able to touch the lives of so many people in so many places in the world, but it was not always an easy task. The protection mandate of UNHCR, which is unique among UN agencies, often puts it on the wrong side of the government. It is difficult both to help the refugees and please the governments at the same time. I would therefore urge all concerned to remember that the principles of refugee protection are essential ingredients of our common humanity. It must be preserved for the good of mankind. In Bangladesh, we have particular reason to be beholden to international refugee law, as over 10 million of our citizens benefited from it as refugees in India in 1971. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for your indulgence in giving me more time than I should have utilized.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bari. I think we all needed reminding that, as Faulkner said, the past is never past, it's always present. The important thing is learning lessons from them, and you pointed to some good lessons and some not so encouraging lessons. So we have to be prepared for the long haul. I now come to my good friend, Ambassador Shahidul Haq, former Foreign Secretary, to come and share his views.
Thank you, sir. Could you kindly bring the PowerPoint? Answer. Good. Thank you very much. I think we all are kind of very tired listening. At least I am extremely tired of listening. So I thought I will use a PowerPoint to at least visually give you some impression if my words are not reaching properly to your ear. There has been reference here and there today on the whole issue of accountability and justice. So when Professor Imtiaz Hossain asked for a title, and I look at the program, I said, nothing is left for me. So then I realized quickly that possibly no one wants to look at the accountability and justice, which I'll bring in. Also, let me start off with the good news. We were hoping that with the change in the United States of administration, things will start happening. And I think it started happening even before Biden took oath. In fact, 2 days before Biden took oath, the Secretary of State select Blinken faced the Senate hearing to fasten the process of his acceptance. And one of the senator asked him in the question and answer that, do you think that you will supervise the Rohingya issue? And he was very eloquent. He said, I will personally supervise the interministerial committee, which will review our policy vis-a-vis the Rohingyas. There is a background. That's why it struck my chord. In 2017 and 18, United States, possibly you don't know, because it was not made public, sent a series of people to do a kind of a field-based research and to bring out that whether genocide has been committed in the case of Rohingyas in Myanmar or not. And they, it was, I was privy to the draft. And it had actually concluded in those days, the thing that we are talking about. I'll not reveal that. And then they backed out. They said it's ethnic cleansing, but they kept the report, the ongoing work. I hope that this inter-agency review committee will bring that up. That will make a fundamental shift the way some of the countries look at the Rohingya crisis. So that's something extremely encouraging for us, those who believe in accountability and justice. Now, what's happening in the Myanmar right now? Because we think that people, 101 million Rohingyas has left, come to Bangladesh. About 600,000 are still in the detention center, concentration camp, that I call it. I've seen it 3 times, so that's why it's much easier to categorize this. I say status quo, possibly things have gone good from worse. Absolutely not. This is December UN Third Committee report, which suggests that there's a continuous serious human rights violations as of now. So it's not something, it stopped even after ICJ's one. And there is I don't know which one, yeah. This is to further strengthen my argument, is that this is ASEAN Rakhine report, very recent, December. And where ASEAN saying, it's not UN, it is not High Commissioner for Human Rights, but UN is suggesting, and I leave it with you on this PowerPoint so that your students can see this. They have also said that there's no improvement, nothing. In fact, they have not even given any attention to the ICJ verdict. Now, I will go quickly so that the question I'll be very happy. What that we are talking about, certainly we'll look after the Rohingyas who are here, we'll build the houses, all kinds of things. But that has been the approach of Bangladesh for 2 decades. With due respect to my seniors, when we sent this back in late 70s and early 90s, we never thought of their rights. We thought that as long as they can go, hands off. That was wrong, utterly wrong. Because what has happened, that's why I like the word circle. They go, they come back, they go and they come back. Some of these Rohingyas are coming back to Bangladesh 4th time. 4th time. So what has happened? Nothing has happened. Our bilateral approach has utterly been a mistake. If we had taken the issue to the UN in 78, if not 78, if in early 90s, possibly you would have been better off now. So there are 4 ways that we can deal the accountability issues. And here I would like to also quote my Prime Minister, because I think we can continue to critically look at Bangladesh's evolving policy after 2017 and blame the whole government. But there's something which has happened, which has been globally recognized. From a bilateral diplomatic approach, we have moved to bilateral and multilateral. It's not or. It is not bilateral, multilateral, bilateral and multilateral, a mix of policy approach, which we call hybrid policy. And this has been possible because of the courage, because of the foresight, because of the bold decision that the Prime Minister could take. In fact, there was in-house no consensus as to whether Bangladesh will take it to the UN, whether it will be called ethnic cleansing, whether we will demand something a safe zone under the R2P, or we will go to ICJ and ICC subsequently. Then it was done and decided, although she had options, went for it. And that was a very breakthrough in our policy. And that's why you have to appreciate it. You will continue to criticize for the sake of criticism. There are 2 ways we can look at which is called my hypothesis, the pathway to accountability and justice. One is the ICC and ICJ, which is more structured, but there are other mechanisms evolved over the years in the UN, which is called IIIM, which has been tested in Syria, and currently through a resolution which has been also tested in the Rohingya case. Also the whole responsibility to protect. That's a brilliant piece of doctrine which should also be used with the consent of the UN system and the international community. Some of these things will now possibly come forth because of the United States. Now, that's where the whole safe zone concept comes from, which our Prime Minister proposed in 2017. Said, he said, these people cannot go because they are fearful of their consequences, and they have seen what could happen to them. So let's have a safe zone monitored by UN system. Is there enough appetite? I don't think so. When we said these things in the UNGA, we were called by the Secretariat of the UN Security Council. He said, what are the safe zone you are talking about? Is it something like Bosnia Herzegovina? I said, no. We are not talking about a military intervention. We are talking about not a military monitor. We are talking about monitor coming from the ASEAN countries to see how they are being treating the Rohingyas who are in the concentration camp. I think I'll have to go a little faster. So this is the ICJ. It's a breakthrough. It is a fundamental breakthrough. And ICJ would not have been possible if Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina wouldn't have agreed to let us go and pursue this through OIC. So it is a baby of Bangladesh's policy approach, and which has paid back. We were also not sure, because we have never walked in this path in the Foreign Office. We were not sure whether this could eventually come out at the agency. And we are also not sure how soon we can have even the, can someone help getting this back? I'll have to go quick, otherwise. Okay, now what happened is the court quickly gave a verdict, much earlier than even some of us was passionate about this, who took a risk in our career to push the government to do it, and came out with a verdict, which is, no out of the 17 judges, where one was by the Myanmar, no one disagreed. So we thought it will be something like 12 versus 5. But all of them agreed. What happened actually in the ICJ? When we were talking about today of the whole identity issue of Rohingyas, the court has given, they looked at all submissions and said the Rohingya has a special status because of their vulnerability. I'll encourage my younger colleagues to look at that, bring that out. It's a court verdict. Court for the first time has given, the way other communities were given after Second World War, a special status, and asked the government of Myanmar to take appropriate measures to protect them as a special group. So they are actually violating right now the ICJ verdict. And then there was that's, I think, the master stroke in the ICJ verdict. Rohingyas are Rohingya. Let's not call them anything else, even by Suu Kyi. So that's something I was expecting that someone would bring it out, read the verdict, which is quite long, and say that why the court decided that they are special ethnic minority who needs protection because they are being destroyed under the genocide, according to the Genocide Convention. That's one. And they said, it will take a little longer to have all the hearing, so we'll issue an interim measure. That's also very unique, where the court decided to go ahead and have this interim measure. And it's very elaborate. I don't think I have time today to say it. Now, Bangladesh continue to attach high importance to that, including not only in terms of providing more than 5,000 pages of documents, videos taken by our law enforcement agencies in terms of court evidence, but also in terms of paying for it. There's not too many OIC countries who wants to pay. So that's what Myanmar continues to remain an open prison without an end. Absolute. I've come to an end. So this is what it is. But I was very intrigued to hear that It is not only a humanitarian issue. Because when we started dealing with it, we thought it's a humanitarian issue. Halfway through, we realized, no, it's a human rights issue. Now we realize, it's a geopolitical issue. And that is the map that I thought I'll show you. This is a fault line between the British Indian Army or British Army and the Japanese Army. Japanese Army wanted to push through and get the warm water port, Cox's Bazar, because their logistic was becoming a nightmare. And the British were much clever. They actually employed a whole, not a division, but an army. They brought a lieutenant general to make sure that Japanese army never get an access to the Cox's Bazar. So that is the fault line there. That's why there's a bulge. And Myanmar was supporting Japanese army in those days. That's why you see a pattern. So it is a geopolitical issue. It is a humanitarian issue. It's a human rights issue. But fundamentally, it is an issue of Rohingya that we should never forget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shahid. I'm sorry I had to hurry you along. We'll take a 1-minute break. Ms. Mia Seppo will leave. So we'd like to, on behalf of IUB, present to her a small token of our appreciation.
Flowers despite leaving early, that's very generous.
I think we will resume. Everyone was so fascinating. There are lots of lessons to be learned. I found it difficult cutting short, particularly when one person requested for additional time and shared its experiences. I'd like to call now on Major General Mohammad Ashabuddin for his remarks as a discussant.
Yes, sir.
Kindly keep it as short as you can, but I will not.
How short it is?
I leave that to your judgment.
My question is how short
We
it
are already
is.
over time, so.
You know, in the military there is a jokes. You say pull on the shocks. Just how much I should pull it on. So this is here, right? Thank you very much, sir. In fact, I had some points to discuss today, but I could see some of my students are here. I'm more encouraged because seeing my students here, not for the audience much, but however, time is as short as possible as I know. But I was trying to think, what should I start with? Let me tell you one story, beautiful story. Back in 2012, I was commanding the whole of the gamut from Saint Martin down to Noakhali, Shivapur Bridge. It was my area of responsibility. I was the commanding general of the whole area. In the month of July, the intelligence reported a huge number of Rohingyas are pushed in the zero line. I asked them how many. Sir, 200 to 300. I'm pouring in more. I just told them, stop them on the border zero line. Don't allow them to cope in. And just 2 months before, the commanding general of the Myanmar, General So Win, and my counterpart of that part, General Tingtam, I remember, they were visiting my headquarters and Dhaka, then went to my headquarters, were with me for 2 days. We played golf, a lot of gupshup and a lot of good things. When this reported, I I played golf with them also. To my Bhattiari Golf Club, I was the president. So what I said, I sent a message to my counterpart that you played golf in my course. Now it's my turn to come and play golf in Mongdu, in Botiro. So I'm starting, but I'm not coming alone. I'm coming with a huge number of golfers. I gave literally a threat that unless you take them, I'm coming to play golf. You understand the golf playing is in some other means. And within a shortest possible time, he withdrew all the Rohingyas back to their homeland. This is one of the small incidents I talked about. So, but in 2017, in 17th of August, maybe, huge influx of Rohingyas in Bangladesh. And my friend, ex-Francis Shahid said that it's not the first time, it's the fourth time this took place. Rohingya influx not only in Bangladesh, if you see the history, 1962-64, 300,000 went to China, in India, 100,000 to China, many countries. In Bangladesh, from after the War of Independence till date, 2017, more than 1.2 million came into Bangladesh. And very judiciously, one of the speakers said that, my friend Shahid said that, why we could not take the right measures, that like a cycle, why coming and going? Why couldn't take a far-reaching measures that they must not come? We should have taken the issue to the United Nations that time. Right, that's not my point. I've gone through, I've seen the total curriculum today. Everything has been discussed of the Rohingya issue as per the Rohingya cycle. But I think one small aspect has been left behind, which I will touch upon within a very shortest possible time. And that is the geopolitical environment and likely security threats for Bangladesh. I think this part has not been covered here today. Right, this segment has not been covered. So, ladies and gentlemen, assalamu alaikum and very good evening to you all. And just I'm going to cover it up, that geopolitical environment. You see, this dimension of Rohingya is very interesting and little diverse in nature. It's equally disappointing for Bangladesh as Rohingya issue projected a mixed geopolitical environment for us. Our very close neighbor, India, and little immediate neighborhood, little far, is China. These two major powers has not played in favor of Bangladesh. I can say very here, standing here. We didn't support Bangladesh on the issue of Myanmar, the geopolitically. This subject is complex and unpredictable. Let's talk about the India, our so good neighbor, helping us in war of liberation everywhere. India has recently revitalized her relation with Myanmar for the interest of trade and security due to her obvious interest for the balance of Chinese influence in the region. India has considerably has invested huge lot of projects in Myanmar, political, economic, and military ties with Myanmar. India's involvement, we can see there. Investment in energy sector, multi-dimensional transport corridor in the Arakan province to gain access to the northeastern India and see to a port and an alternative land route opening towards the China and South, bypassing Bangladesh. The word is bypassing Bangladesh. India had made a lot of arrangement with this. So if we see this, their Kaladan multi-modal transport corridor that with river and the road transportation in the Arakan state will give India access from and to the port of Sitwe, bypassing Bangladesh. For so many reasons, India is possibly eyes Myanmar as a better strategic partner than Bangladesh. If we see deeply, India's response to the recent tension between Bangladesh and Myanmar over the Rohingya issue provided her inclination to the Myanmar. India, being the closest neighbor of Bangladesh, has not taken any remarkable step to refrain Myanmar from acts of atrocities, the acts of ethnic cleansing, or in some form, I can say it's a genocide against the Myanmar security forces the Rohingya people. So in an assessment we, based on the conflict between the Myanmar and Bangladesh, if you see, I think India may take a silent stand for, or may surface as a mediator, not in favor of Bangladesh. I'll finish with the Chinese influence here in Myanmar. China follows a strong development strategy with Myanmar. Like India, China has also eyed Myanmar as a leverage towards controlling Indian influence over the Bay of Bengal. China is vigorously pursuing strong trade, including military relations with Myanmar. Among many others, China has funded the project of Kok Fu seaport in Myanmar. This would provide China a strategic access to the Indian Ocean, bypassing the choke point Malacca Strait. China has constructed a huge pipeline to Yangon province and all those things. So whatever I said as the point to note here is that though the trial meeting has been done last week, and China, along with, though we can see that there is a game of meeting, but a concrete things is coming up, I'm not sure. Let's hope for the best that something will come up. Hope that this meeting should have involved United Nations, Japan, and many other countries. So, but one point you should remember that China and Russia also, in many occasions, have played against Bangladesh in United Nations Security Council. So that's about this, and the security threats for Bangladesh is huge. In 2018, I was invited to House of Commons to speak on the Rohingya issue in front of so many British MPs and the Lords. They asked me one question: what is the security threats you find tell me in one word. I said, look, gentlemen, I visited a number of times the Rohingya camps in Kutupalong and all. When they were forced to Bangladesh, 60% of the population were 7 to 15 years of age, those young boys and girls. I said, think after 10 years, these all will be 25 and 30 years. Each and everyone will turn to be a human bomb. How is going to affect the security of Bangladesh? Human trafficking, drug trafficking, arms trafficking, whatnot. It's not only going to affect the Bangladesh, it is going to affect the whole of the region. So it's a time for the international community to come into play, and let's solve the problem. So I'm not going to have any critique or any emphasizing any point for the other speakers. All learned speakers have spoken so well. With this, thank you very much, sir. I finish here. Allah Hafiz. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much, General, for making it concise and to the point, and a very important point. In fact, we could have 1 hour's discussion just on this subject of geopolitics and what's at play. Thank you very much. I think we'll have to dispense with the Q&As because we are well over time. So I'll request Professor Imtiaz, the wizard who has brilliantly put this conference together and with his team. He deserves really a great round of applause for it. But to bring this conference to a close.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Bhai. You are quite an inspiration since you came. I have just 3 points to make, and they're very brief. I think the first one is the answer to Professor Dr. Amina Mohsin. Can the Rohingya circle be unbroken comes from a popular folk song in the United States. Will the circle be unbroken? For example, if high school students graduate and go to many different universities for graduate work, will they meet again? That is one sense of it. The term is derived from a Christian hymn. When will that unbroken thing is a meeting in heaven? Heaven is not meant here, but for global studies, for us, it means, can the Rohingya family get back together again? And hopefully Rakhine. That's just one circle. What about all the humanitarian workers in Kutupalong and other camps? That is another circle. Diplomats, that's a third circle. So there are many circles working that can help breed this idea of the Rakhine under Rohingya control outcome. So I don't know if it's a cycle or anything, but it is a kind of a, we are together no matter what. A second point I'd like to make is basically, I have never been to any of the refugee camps here, but I feel very much a part of it, because had it not been for my knowledge of English, as a teenager, I might have been in one of those refugee camps, 1971, Agartala. It's now called Netaji Bose Airport. It was then Dum Dum Airport near Calcutta then, not even Kolkata. And our first High Commissioner, Honorable Hossein Ali, needed someone who spoke English to take the foreign journalists to all the camps, refugee camps, military camps, and so forth. And that is where I came in because of that. Otherwise, who would have known where I would have been without that English, sitting in one of those camps? But that camp also gives me a comparative perspective. And that comparative perspective can be, I saw securitization there. We could not do anything without Indian BSF, Border Security Force, in charge. That is quite different here. Securitization today has to go through porous borders because of the greater democratization, transparency, and all of those reasons that we did not have then. But they did a good clinical job. One other thing, well, a few other things I noticed then that we didn't know, we didn't have then, that we do have here. For example, when we talk of education, although we were only there for 9 months, but education was not on the agenda for refugees as it is today. There would never have been education in emergencies as the United Nations is floating today. And secondly, you would never have anything like gender sensitivity, gender balance. That was not even in the language or the dictionary. It is heavily there today, as you heard from so many people today. So there are big contrasts. We can learn a lot that we can apply to make sure that we remain as much revered by the future Rohingyas in Rakhine as we should be for India. If India had not let us in, 10 million of us, not 1 million, 10 million of us, if we had not got in, there would be no Bangladesh today. It's a matter of basically complete game politics, superpower politics, whatever politics you call it. India came and gave us the space. We can now sit down and say many things about India. Let's not forget the sibling bondage that we have. And that 1971, I think, does play a part, even though there might be some disagreements here and there with India, water over the rivers and so forth, but there's a lot in common. My final comment is basically institutional, and this is to basically thank you all. It has been a huge project today. There were many forces bringing it together. I would like to say on behalf of all the trustees, on behalf of my Vice Chancellor acting, on behalf of all my colleagues, and here I certainly include Ambassador Bhai. He has been a true big brother since he has joined us. And so many others of you. Dr. Raju has been here for almost the whole day. Lecturer Sharmeen came, and there are so many of the younger faculties. I must say that they are here because many of them are writing chapters for a book. We talked about disseminating non-government organizational dissemination of the whole issues. We are working on that, and they have written the chapter. Next week, the week after, I'll be looking at what they have written, hoping that we can send it for a publication somewhere. So in academia, we are playing a part, and we would like to do that. So on behalf of the university, I also want to thank all of my students, and they have come from 3 different departments: global studies, media communication, and social science and humanities. If you are still here, would you please stand up and please take your bow because you deserve it. Ladies, gentlemen, my peers, can I also suggest to you, these are students who are working with the Rohingya issues. They know more about it than their counterparts anywhere. If for some reason you need teaching assistants, if you need internships, interns, these are the ones who can really come and help you. And certainly our younger faculty members who are all writing on the issues that we are talking about, if they come to you for an interview on the subject, I hope you will open your arms and help them all as much as you can. This issue can make us look, as our honorable foreign secretary, both of them have said, they can really make Bangladesh look like a golden foreign policy player. Let's go for it. Thank you.
Our foreign secretary was online until a few minutes ago. So if he's still there, thank you very much, sir, for having stayed with us for this. And a special round of applause to all our participants. Thank you.
We do have a little token of our IUB love. And who do we begin with? Please. Marufa, can you come up here? And then Dr. Marufa will take over.
Thank you, honorable panelists. A small token from our side, a flower bouquet and a small goodie bag, publications from Global Studies and Governance. I would like to request my students to come over and present the first flower to Ambassador ex-Foreign Secretary Shahidul Haq. Sir, please.
I think he
Now I'd like to request Professor Amina Mohsin to come over and take a thank you gift. Thank you gift. Now I'd like to request Major General Mohammad Asabuddin sir, please. Now I'd like to request Asif Monir. Thank you so much, everybody. It's too late now. I thank you from all of our GSG faculties to be here this late. Thank you.
Thank you.